Welcome back to the deep dive. We take the sources you share, dive in, and pull out the key insights, getting straight to the point on complex topics. Today we're looking at something that seems simple but really isn't. How many fish can you safely keep in a tank? Fish density.
Yeah, it sounds like there should be an easy answer, right? Like that old inch per gallon rule people used to throw around. But the source material we looked at really shows that figuring out the right density is maybe one of the most variable things in keeping animals. It depends on so much.
Totally. And the thing that kicked this whole deep dive off was this observation from one source seeing a huge tank in a grocery store just absolutely packed with tilapia. And, if you ever kept fish, your first thought is probably, wow, that's way too crowded. Those fish must be miserable.
Exactly. That's the immediate reaction. You think stress, you think aggression, you think terrible water quality because there's just so much, well, life in there. So our goal today is really to unpack that, let's call it the tilapia paradox. Why could that super crowded tank actually be okay? And how does the answer to how many fish change so drastically depending on why you have the fish, what kind they are, and even how old they are? It's less about just counting gallons and more about the whole system design.
Okay, let's get specific then.
Yeah.
That tilapia tank, it looked like chaos.
Mm.
But the key context from the source was, these weren't pets. This was a holding tank for fish meant as food.
Right. The purpose is absolutely critical here. If you're looking at fish as an aquaculture product, you want them to grow fast, you want to harvest them
Sure.
efficiently, your tolerance for density is just completely different than if you're keeping, say, beautiful angelfish for display in your living room. The source really stresses that the big problems you expect with overcrowding, especially the water quality crashing from all the waste, well, those aren't guaranteed if you build the system specifically to handle it.
Let's talk about that waste. You mentioned high biomass earlier. For someone maybe not familiar with aquaculture terms, what does that actually mean for the water inside the tank?
Sure. Biomass is basically just the total weight of all the fish in that volume of water. So high biomass means a lot of fish weight. And more fish weight means, well, more fish waste produced much faster. Lots of ammonia, which is toxic, than nitrate. In a normal home aquarium, that much waste hitting the water so quickly, it would overwhelm the filter, crash the system, probably in hours. The reason that tilapia tank could handle it is because its filtration wasn't just a simple sponge filter. It was likely operating more like what's called a recirculating aquaculture system, or RAS, heavy-duty stuff.
Okay, so high-tech life support, essentially. What does that robust filtration system actually involve? Like, technically, how did it manage all that waste from so many fish?
It means the filter isn't just helping maintain the water. It's the absolute core of the system's viability. To make that density work, you need incredibly fast removal of those waste products. We're probably talking about water flow rates that turn over the entire tank's volume many, many times per hour. And that water is being pushed through really efficient biological media things like specialized bioballs or maybe moving bed filter stuff with huge surface area for beneficial bacteria to break down ammonia super fast. Commercial places might even add protein skimmers to pull out dissolved organics or UV sterilizers to kill pathogens, stuff you almost never see on a home tank.
Right, so the engineering becomes the star. But hang on. High density usually means high stress, which often leads to fish getting aggressive, even normally peaceful ones. The source said these tilapia were gentle, but wouldn't just being crammed in like that cause stress and fighting anyway?
That's a really good point, and it brings in the second crucial factor, the species itself. The source did specify these were mature, gentle tilapia. Tilapia are generally schooling fish. Once they're adults, they tend to be less aggressively territorial than, say, many cichlids. So while, yeah, there is definitely stress, the sheer density itself, paradoxically, can sometimes reduce certain types of aggression in schooling fish. How, well, nobody can really establish and defend a territory when it's shoulder to shoulder everywhere. Everyone's equally crowded.
Huh, interesting. So it's like a two-part solution. Amazing filtration handles a physical waste problem, and choosing a relatively placid schooling species helps manage the behavioral side, even using the density to suppress territorial fights. It really shifts the whole idea of optimal density away from just space per fish towards, can the system handle the biological load?
Precisely. If you look at how commercial fish farms measure density, they often talk in pounds or kilos of fish per gallon or liter.
Mhm.
For some of these high-tech tilapia systems, they might be aiming for densities that are, 30, 40, maybe even 50 times higher than what you'd ever dream of in a home aquarium. The technology is basically compensating for the lack of space by keeping the water parameters pristine, even if, to our eyes, the fish look uncomfortably crowded. Objectively, the water's healthy.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating for me. We've kind of established that with enough tech and the right kind of mature, calm fish, you can solve the physical problems of crowding. But what happens when that's not the whole picture? Where does this technology solves density idea break down? It seems like behavior and maybe development come into play.
Yes, and that takes us right into the next part of our source material, which shifted gears completely. It moved away from the commercial tilapia and looked at experiences with breeding certain ornamental fish, specifically bettas and jewel cichlids. And for these fish, just having clean water in a crowded space, it's absolutely not enough. Their density needs are tied up with their biology and their behavior in much more complex ways.
I remember that part clearly. The big takeaway was that density has a massive impact on how the young fish, the fry, actually develop. You might keep adult tilapia packed in clean water, but if you try that with baby jewel cichlids or young bettas, it's a disaster.
Yeah, think about what's different. When you're dealing with fry, these tiny juvenile fish, they don't just need room to swim. They need space to, well, grow up properly. Take jewel cichlids. They're known for being pretty territorial, even aggressive, especially when breeding or young. Even with perfect water quality, packing them in forces constant stress, constant fighting, constant interaction. That's not good for development.
And the betta, the Siamese fighting fish, is like the ultimate example where filtration just doesn't matter for density, right?
Absolutely. Male bettas need to be kept separate, visually and physically, or they'll fight, often to the death. That's density being dictated purely by behavior. Full stop. But it's not just aggression. The sources also pointed out physical development problems that pop up with high density in young fish.
Like what? How does being too crowded actually stunt a fish's growth if the water is clean?
Well, one big thing the source mentioned is what's called chemical inhibition. Apparently, when lots of fry are packed together, they release specific hormones or pheromones into the water. Scientists think these chemicals basically act as a signal telling other fry, hey, resources are scarce here, slow down your growth. It's like a natural brake system. But in an aquarium where you want them to grow, this just leads to stunting. They might also just not get enough physical space to find and eat food properly, especially if there's competition. Makes them weaker later on.
Wow. So we've gone from a physical trade-off, give up space but add filtration, to what sounds like a really damaging biological trade-off. Lack of space leads to stress, chemical signals, and stunted growth, regardless of filtration. So for breeding, especially these types of fish, the course basically said figuring out the right density is super complex because it changes depending on exactly how old the fish are. No single rule applies.
Exactly right. For the adult tilapia, the main challenge was managing waste. Simple physics, almost. But for those cichlid fry, you need to provide space, maybe hiding places, reduce that constant stress, and somehow minimize those growth-inhibiting chemicals. Filtration alone just can't address those developmental needs. That dense tilapia tank setup, it would be completely wrong, like a desert for raising healthy cichlid fry.
Okay, we've covered a lot here, from that packed grocery store tank to the delicate needs of baby fish.
Yeah.
Let's try and synthesize this. If you, the listener, are thinking about setting up a tank, what are the absolute key things that decide what optimal density actually means for your situation?
Okay, based on contrasting those examples, I think we land on three main pillars, or maybe variables, that define density. First, as we said, is the purpose. Why do you have the fish? Is it for fast growth as food, or is it for long-term health and enjoyment as a pet? That changes everything.
Right. And second is the species and its typical temperament. Huge difference between those schooling, mature, relatively gentle tilapia and, say, aggressive young cichlids or solitary bettas. The fish itself sets a hard limit sometimes.
And third, and this one seems really crucial from the sources, is the life stage. What works fine for a tough adult fish might be really bad, even deadly, for fragile fry or juveniles. They need space for more than just swimming. They need it to develop properly, behaviorally, and physically.
Which loops us right back to the equipment, the system design. Because all three of those factors, purpose, species, life stage, dictate what kind of support system, what kind of hardware you actually need. If you choose to go for higher density, you're not just making a small adjustment. You're basically signing up for a completely different kind of system, potentially a much more complex and robust one.
That's the core takeaway, I think. In a lightly stocked tank, your filter is kind of like a safety net, helpful, but maybe not running at its absolute limit. But in a high-density system, like that commercial tilapia setup, the filtration becomes the absolute life support. It has to compensate for the lack of space by neutralizing waste products incredibly fast. That's what lets them push the biomass limits.
So the big picture is, High density isn't automatically bad, ethically or biologically, but it's always conditional. It demands specific, usually intensive ways to mitigate the downsides, whether that's superpowered filtration for the physical waste or maybe complete separation for behavioral issues, like with the bettas.
And we can manage the physical side incredibly well now. Technology is amazing. That tilapia tank kind of proves that you can keep the water chemically perfect, even with tons of fish, if you engineer it right.
Which leaves us with a really interesting, maybe even slightly uncomfortable question for you to think about. If technology, like these advanced filtration systems, can get so good that it perfectly cancels out all the physical problems of overcrowding the ammonia, the bad water quality, everything, what's left? Is it just stress? And if stress is the only negative thing remaining, but we can't easily see it or measure it on the fish, how do we ethically decide what's acceptable? How do we count for that invisible cost?
Yeah, that's something to chew on long after you've cleaned the filter and the water looks crystal clear.
Definitely food for thought. Well, we've reached the bottom on this deep dive into fish density. Thanks for exploring all these angles with us.
My pleasure. Until next time.